Hello and welcome to our Abdomen 2, Lesson 2. We are going to talk about the organs of the abdominal cavity, mainly the small intestine and the large intestine. So at the end of this module, the students must be able to identify the organs of the abdominal cavity, specifically the small and the large intestine, differentiate the small and large intestine, and describe the location of different organs of the abdominal cavity in relation to each other. Now let's look at this picture. So this is our gastrointestinal tract or our GIT. So it starts off with the esophagus, and then the food goes down to the stomach, and then goes towards the duodenum, the jejunum, and then the ileum. After that, it goes towards our cecum here, and then the ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, the rectum, and the anus. So this is our gastrointestinal tract. So let's talk about the small intestine. So the small intestine is the longest part of the alimentary canal. Again, it is the longest part of the alimentary canal or the GIT. So it is divided into three parts. We have the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. So most digestion and absorption of nutrients occur in a long tube called the small intestine. Because of this, its structure is specifically adapted for these functions. Now, the length of our small intestine provides a large surface area for digestion and absorption, and that area is further increased by the circular folds, the villi, and then the microvilli. So as you can see here in the picture, we have here the circular folds in the small intestine, and then the villi. Okay, so again, our small intestine is divided into three parts. We have the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. So the diameter of our small intestine is approximately 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch. Its length reaches up to 3 meters or 10 feet in a living person and 6.5 meters to 21 feet in a cadaver. So in a cadaver, there is loss of smooth muscle tone after death. That's why it's longer than in a person who is alive or living. So as you can see, the small intestine begins at the pyloric sphincter of the stomach right here and coils through the central and inferior part of the abdominal cavity, central and then inferior, and eventually opens into the large intestine right here. Okay, now um, let's look at the picture again of the small intestine. Again, after the stomach, it goes through the duodenum, the jejunum here, and then the ileum here. Okay, so let's talk about the duodenum. So our duodenum is a C-shaped tube about 10 inches or 25 centimeters long, which joins the stomach to the jejunum. So this duodenum means 12, and it is so named because it is about as long as the width of 12 fingers. Now, this duodenum receives the openings of the bile from the pancreatic ducts. Take note of that. And of course, the first inch or the first inch of the duodenum resembles the stomach. Okay. Um, in this case, it is covered on its anterior and posterior surfaces with peritoneum and has the lesser omentum attached to its upper border. And in its lower border, the attachment is at the greater omentum. Now, the remainder of the duodenum is retroperitoneal, being only partially covered by the peritoneum. So it is actually situated in the epigastric and in the umbilical region. So let's look at this picture. So again, your duodenum is situated at the epigastric right here, as you can see the first part of the duodenum, and in the umbilical region. Okay. So next, in a patient with duodenal ulcer, as you can see, as the stomach empties its contents, which are really highly acidic, it will go towards the duodenum. So the acidic chyme is squirted against the anterolateral wall of the first part of the duodenum, and it may cause a duodenal ulcer. Next part of the small intestine is the jejunum. So the jejunum and the ileum together measure about 20 feet or 6 meters long. So each has distinctive features, but there is a gradual change from one to the other. But specifically, our jejunum begins at the duodenojejunal flexure. Again, so that is this part is your duodenal duodenojejunal flexure right here. Okay, so this is the first part of your duodenum. Second part, the third, fourth, and we have here the duodenojejunal flexure. Now, aside from that, the coils of the jejunum and ileum are freely mobile and are attached to the posterior abdominal wall by what we call as your mesentery of the small intestine. So let's discuss the next part. So our jejunum actually, the coils of the jejunum is actually freely mobile together with also the coils of our ileum, and they are attached to the posterior abdominal wall. Next is the ileum. So this ileum, which is this part, it actually joins the large intestine at the smooth muscle sphincter called the ileocecal sphincter. So that sphincter is found right here. So the final and longest region of the small intestine is the ileum. Next would be after passing through the ileocecal sphincter, ileo meaning ileum, cecal meaning the cecum, it's found between the small and the large intestine. So the large intestine, its length is about 1.5 meters or 5 feet, and its diameter reaches up to 6.5 centimeters or 2.5 inches. So it is the terminal portion of the GI tract, so which is called your large intestine. Now, um, it is attached to the posterior abdominal wall by its mesocolon, which is a double layer of peritoneum. So, aside from that, structurally, the four major regions of the large intestine are the cecum, right here, the ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, the rectum, and then the anal canal. So these are the four major regions. Again, we have the cecum, the colon, the rectum, and then the anal canal. So hanging inferior to the ileocecal valve is the cecum, which is a small pouch about 6 centimeters. So attached to the cecum is a twisted coiled tube measuring about 8 centimeters in length called the appendix or the vermiform appendix. Now, specifically in our cecum right here, we have again the ileocecal sphincter or the valve, which actually guards the opening from the ileum to the large intestine. Now, this function allows materials from the small intestine to pass into the large intestine. Aside from that, in the cecum, there is presence of distended gas, or it is actually sometimes distended because of the gas and can be palpated through the anterior abdominal wall. Now, as what we have mentioned earlier, there is a twisted coiled tube measuring about 8 centimeters in length called your vermiform appendix or the appendix. So it is again a narrow muscular tube containing a large amount of lymphoid tissue. So it varies in length from 3 to 5 inches or 8 to 13 centimeters. So the base is attached to the posteromedial surface of the cecum about 1 inch below the ileocecal junction. So the remainder of the appendix is free, and it has a complete peritoneal covering which is attached to the mesentery of the small intestine by a short mesentery of its own called the mesoappendix. So as what we can see over here in this image below, this is your McBurney's point. So for example, yes, for example, in patients with appendicitis or inflammation of the appendix, this area will promote or will elicit tenderness if there is release of the palpation. Okay, so again, your appendix is found or can be found at the right lower quadrant of the abdomen. Next is the ascending colon. So the ascending colon is about 5 inches in length and lies in the right lower quadrant. extends upward from the cecum to the inferior surface of the right lobe of the liver, where it turns to the left, forming the colic hepatic or right colic hepatic flexure or right hepatic flexure. And it actually becomes continuous with the transverse colon. Next, the transverse colon. So it begins at the right colic flexure below the right lobe of the liver, and it is about 15 inches in length and extends across the abdomen, occupying the umbilical region. So, it begins again at the right colic flexure below the right lobe of the liver and hangs downward, suspended by the transverse mesocolon from the pancreas. So after the descending colon, as after the transverse colon here, we proceed to the descending colon. So the descending colon is about 10 inches in length and lies in the left upper and lower quadrants. So it extends downward from the left colic flexure to the pelvic brim, where it becomes continuous with the sigmoid colon. Now, for the sigmoid colon, as you can see, it begins near the left iliac crest, projects medially to the midline, and terminates as the rectum at about the level of the third sacral vertebra or S3. So that is your sigmoid colon. So it is found actually right here. After the sigmoid colon, we then proceed to the rectum. So if this is the sigmoid colon, this part is your rectum. So it is about 15 centimeters in length. It lies anterior to the sacrum and the coccyx, and it has this structures, which is the anal canal. It is terminal, 2 to 3 centimeters of the large intestine. And lastly, the opening of the anal canal to the exterior environment, or yes, exterior environment, is called the anus. So this is your rectum, and this is the anal canal, and this is the opening, which is your anus. And lastly, we have the anus. So it is guarded by an internal and external smooth, internal and external muscles. And these are your internal anal sphincter of smooth muscle, that's involuntary, and the external anal sphincter of skeletal muscle, which is voluntary. So normally, these sphincters keep the anus closed except during the elimination of feces. Now, what is the difference between the small and the large intestine? So, first, your small intestine contains smooth walls compared to your large intestine, which contains hostra. Now, these hostra, as you can see here on the picture, right here, so these hostra are actually formations in the large intestine that gives it a sacculated presentation. Again, if the lining of the wall of the small intestine is smooth, on the other hand, in the large intestine, it is sacculated in large folds termed your hostra. Okay, again, there is a presence of hostra in our large intestine. Next, the small intestine contains no fatty tags compared to your large intestine, which has epiploic appendages. So these epiploic appendages are viewed as on the left side of the screen. So these are your epiploic appendages. So aside from that, um, your small intestine also has continuous longitudinal muscle layers, and on the other hand, your large intestine contains Teniae coli. Now, these Teniae coli are longitudinal muscle that is collected into three bands that are found in your large intestine. On the other hand, the longitudinal muscles of the small intestine forms a continuous layer around the gut, which are again found in your small intestine. Next, the mucous membrane of the small intestine has permanent folds, and these are your plicae circularis, which are not found in your large intestine. So the mucous membrane of the small intestine has also its villi, so which are also absent in the large intestine. So its functions are for absorption and digestion. And there are aggregations of lymphoid tissue in your small intestine, which are called your Peyer's patches, which are also absent in the large intestine. So again, these are your villi and your plicae circularis that are found in your small intestine. And these are the epiploic appendages, the hostra, and the Teniae coli, which are found in your large intestine. So this ends our discussion about the large and the small intestine. So I hope you have learned, and stay safe.